Perfect. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Ashley Rochelle. I'm the co-president of Cultural Connections, which is a community of Bay Area museum, arts, and cultural professionals. And we meet to exchange ideas, to share resources and knowledge, and inspire creativity amongst each other. If you're a member, thank you so much for being a friend. If you're not, thank you for being here and for joining us. And for returning new folks. Yeah, we're happy to have you. And if you're new, we hope you'll consider becoming a member, so we can continue putting on programs and discussing relevant topics like we are today. Some of the housekeeping before we begin. So one already, as was mentioned, we are recording and we send out the recording to folks after today. So feel free to, hang in there and listen in. And also a heads up to folks that if you would prefer to keep your video off, feel free to do that. And secondly, please look out for a survey link post-event so you can get us your feedback, please. So with that, I will hand it off to our speakers, to my colleagues to introduce themselves and talk about their experiences with the accreditation process, the good, the bad, and everything tedious in between, what it actually even means. Is it beneficial? According to AAM, it is. So let's talk about how it works, what are some of the challenges when pursuing it, and how we can learn from each other in making that process hopefully a little less painful. So with that, I hand it back off to you, Joanne.
Thank you so much.
Mhm.
Emily, you have a hand raised. Do you have a question?
Oh, sorry, that's an accident.
Oh, okay. All right, I'm going to start sharing now. And for all of those of you who do not know me, I'm Joanne Grant, and I am the Acquisitions Registrar at the Computer History Museum down in Mountain View. However, I work in Fremont at our Archives and Research Center. So I'm not often at the museum, but that is it behind me. Come and visit if you haven't already been. All right, I will start sharing. Now, can everybody see that? Just thumbs up or nod and I won't be able to see it. Okay, cool. Um, so welcome to the Cultural Connections presentation of Museum Accreditation, the good, the bad, and the tedious. I will be providing the basics on what exactly museum accreditation is, what the process entails. And my last slides include some references and some websites, mostly from the American Alliance of Museums, the AAM, just in case you want to learn more about this process or are thinking about it, undertaking it at your own institution. After I conclude, my colleague John Alexander, will speak about his experiences with accreditation at BAMFA, Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Archive. And then following John, Anna Toledano at the Los Gatos History Museum.
Los Altos, yep.
Los Altos. Oh my God, I'm sorry.
It's okay. We love Scottish too. New move.
Basically all of that. She does all of it. But she will speak about her experience with accreditation as well. And there is the email for the board is down below on this first slide. And if you have any follow-up questions or anything, please feel free to contact us through that email. All right, let's get into it. So, museum accreditation. It is a process through which, when completed, can earn your museum recognition for its commitment to and demonstration of the professional standards for education, public service, and collections care. It has been recognized as the gold standard of museum excellence for over 50 years. And what it does is the program combines self-assessment, peer review, and public recognition to ensure the integrity and accessibility of museum collections, to reinforce the education and public service roles that all museums have, and to promote good governance practice and ethical behavior amongst museum staff and stakeholders. one important thing to keep in mind here is that accreditation is a process that museums can choose to undertake. It is not mandatory. No one's going to make you do this. Well, maybe your manager, but it is a choice. The AAM estimates that it takes anywhere from about 8 to 16 months for first-time applicants to fully complete all of the steps in the accreditation process. Yes, that was 8 to 16 months, and we will revisit that in a little bit. Museum accreditation is based on the core standards for museums, which considers two questions when reviewing a museum's accreditation submission. One, how well does the museum achieve its stated mission and goals? Number two, how well does the museum's performance meet standards and best practices as they are generally understood in the museum field as appropriate to its circumstances? And that means every museum is unique. Some museums have this, but not this. So how do their practices meet up to those generally accepted standards? But wait, there's more. Accreditation is just one of a series of programs administered by the American Alliance of Museums. Now, this series of programs is known as the Continuum of Excellence, and you can hopefully see in the bottom right corner of the slide, I have the little graphic from AAM, which has the steps in the order in which it would want a museum to go through the process. So now I will read off the steps, and then I have a little bit additional information that isn't on the slide. So the first one is the Pledge of Excellence. Here it goes. The museum pledges that, in fulfillment of its educational mission, it will strive to operate according to core standards to the best of its abilities and in accordance with its resources. Boom, done, moving on. All right, next we have the Museum Assessment Program, also known as MAP. MAP is a one-year process of self-assessment, institutional activities, and consultative peer review. It includes a site visit and recommendations. Now, the benefits of completing this MAP program are an increased alignment of activities, your museum's mission and its resources. Ideally, you do want to have all those things kind of be working together. Improved practices such as strategic planning, and ideally, increased credibility for your audience. Next, we have Collections Assessment for Preservation, also known as CAP. The CAP program is often a first step for small institutions that wish to improve the condition of their collections. So what it does is it provides small and medium-sized museums with partial funding towards what is known as a general conservation assessment. This assessment basically considers all aspects of collections care, such as the museum's policies and procedures, the collections themselves, and the facilities where they are stored, displayed, studied, etc. Participants who complete this CAP program receive an assessment report that provides recommendations for how the museum can improve its collections care. Another note about the CAP program is that it is administered by the Foundation for Advancement in Conservation, FAIC, under a cooperative agreement with the Institute of Museum and Library Services. Funding for each program year is subject to the availability of funds in the federal budget. So if this is something that you are considering undertaking, just be aware, check websites, etc., to see about available funds at the present time. Okay. Next, we have the Standards of Excellence for History Museums, also known as STEPS. And STEPS is actually administered by the American Association of State and Local History. And it offers small to mid-size history organizations the opportunity to compare their policies and procedures against nationally accepted museum standards. It does this by breaking them down into manageable levels known as basic, good, and better. It allows organizations to complete the program at their own pace, so there's no kind of deadline, and it offers certificates for successfully completing those levels. Now, obviously, that is not a prerequisite for all museums, but it's another optional step that smaller history-based institutions can undergo if they are working towards the accreditation process. And now, last but not least, we have core documents verification, and that is indicated on that slide in the bottom right in the green. Now, the core documents are a prerequisite for all museums seeking first-time accreditation, and this process enables museums to receive recognition and validation that their mission and their core policies meet standards for professional museums. So the program will review your museum's core documents, mission statement, institutional code of ethics, strategic plan, disaster preparedness / emergency response plan, and last but not least, because I'm very partial to them, it's collections management policy. All right. So now that I've thrown all that at you, what is so good about museum accreditation? Well, there's a lot to see on the AAM website. I have parsed it down and provided an example of each. So for credibility and accountability, for example, it enhances your credibility amongst your peer institutions and demonstrates that your museum is fulfilling its public trust obligations. Clear sense of purpose. For example, undergoing the process of accreditation can help you better understand your museum's strengths, goals, priorities, and mission. It may also help to secure grants or funding for your museum. In terms of leverage and support, it can be used as a leveraging tool to attract support for capital improvements. And what museum couldn't use some of those? Sustainability and a stronger institution. For example, it will increase your museum staff knowledge about museum standards and foster improved organizational development. Also, as a bonus, you may be able to enjoy a celebratory staff lunch after receiving accreditation or reaccreditation. So have I sold you on it yet? But wait, it's not all fun. So what's so bad about museum accreditation? Who has time for this? Does it really improve a museum's chances of getting funding? It can detract museum staff from their day-to-day responsibilities, or see bullet point number 1 that I just read. If you fail to meet multiple core standards and/or demonstrate major systemic problems, you can be denied accreditation. If you lose your accreditation, it may result in lost funding, public trust, and a low morale among museum staff and stakeholders, especially given the amount of time required to go through this process. Loss of a museum's accreditation status may jeopardize your chances of obtaining loans from other institutions. So, what is the tedious part of museum accreditation? Let me repeat. What museum employee has time for this? It can take up to 16 months to complete all of the steps in the Continuum of Excellence program. It requires coordination and time from multiple museum departments, including but not limited to accounting, finance, collections, and your executive team. The AAM recommends undertaking the accreditation process every 10 years. Now, you may think, that's pretty decent. That's a big span. But when you consider that the process itself can take over a year to gather all of the necessary requirements, documents, etc., suddenly 10 years doesn't seem like that much time. The process, as mentioned earlier, is peer-reviewed, and so it requires a site visit from 2 to 3 peer reviewers who are selected from AAM to review your museum submission. This site visit can only occur during a predetermined window with the dates listed below. And that is so that peer reviewers can fit this program in with their own schedules. And it can take up to 3 days for said peer reviewers to complete their assessment of your museum during their site visit. That was the quickest rundown you ever heard about museum accreditation. As promised, references, sources, including all the lovely photos that I found for my portion of the presentation. But now, is it worth it? Well, now we will hear from museum professionals and colleagues of mine who have gone through this process. John, take it away.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, so I'm going to focus on the fact that where I'm the Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Berkeley Art Museum, and we had a somewhat unusual accreditation process, which I'm going to focus on with regard to what Joanne discussed, which was the Pledge of Excellence is something you just, as previously she talked about, is something that you just sign. What I'm going to be focusing in on is the MAP or Museum Assessment Program and the core documents verification, because we are not part of the CAP program since we're not really a small museum starting off, and we're not a history museum. So we started our latest round in February of 2022 and is finally reaccredited in January of 2025, which is a little scary, but this is not typical because there were 2 different delays due to COVID, which was still sort of raging pretty hardcore in February 2022. And then after the site visit, the decision was tabled for an additional 6 months while we address the issue. So I'll go into tabling, which is something I have done this before in 2 other institutions that had never been tabled before, so I was a little peeved about that, but I can go into that if we want to have questions. So, Joanne, can you move to the next slide? So really, this museum assessment program is made up of 2 very distinct divisions, one of which is a self-study. And this is the part that you do on your own after you sign the Pledge of Excellence. And it can take up an enormous amount of time. And I can't stress enough that it will require at a very minimum of 2 lead organizers for a certain institution. Sorry, Anna, you probably don't have that many people, but one on the art side and one on the operations side. It will also require the contributions of numerous others, including accounting and finance specialists, building engineers, preparators, registrars, curators, and database administrators. It comes in the form of a 23-page document divided into the following sections, which I will boringly go over in detail. Organizational data, which is simple demographic questions such as museum type, etc. Museum overview, questions that gather more detailed information about the museum's mission, collections, etc. I'll go into these individually. Operational data, which is questions that gather detailed data on finances, facilities, human resources, attendance, etc. And that's the big part of it. That's about 50% of the entire document. So that's the killer. Changes since you've been last reviewed, which is a mix of questions about what has changed since the last accreditation and challenges that are going forward. And then the last part is the attachments, which Joanne referred to as the core documents verification. So next. So yes, the organizational data, this is actually a pretty easy part, which is really just your basic name, address, and type of institution that you're working in, art, science, history, planetarium, etc. One thing you really have to find is your annual attendance figures and your general operational budget figure, which is core. Next. The mission statement. So a mission statement most places have, and they do provide samples if you don't have one. And that, of course, I can't say what, the Berkeley Art Museum has a very specific mission statement, which has changed over the years, as they often tend to do. So every institution is going to do their own, and they do provide samples if you need guidance on it. The more elusive points are your IRS status, which in most places are 501(c) nonprofits, so that's probably fine, but there's occasionally different for-profit places, foundations, and things like that. The percentage of your collection that is accessioned is important to know. And if you're a LEED building, which is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, essentially a green building certification, which is helpful, I believe, in garnering accreditation. And there are certain levels of certification for that LEED status. Standard points, contact information, who's going to be driving this, and what other affiliations the institution's part of, mainly like AAMD. Next. So then museum systems. So yeah, this is a little bit more vague, but how systems are handled within the institution. So general categories like mission, exhibition, curating, fabrication, budget, conservation, etc. And this is really just a system of drop downs. So how is your exhibition curating handled on, there's three different options: by site, centralized, and customized for each site. Now, most places are going to be standalone places are by site, but as a University Art Museum or maybe a Smithsonian style government institution, there may be different drop downs, which are by site, centralized, and customized for each site. And those are applied to each of those categories above. So for instance, HR at Berkeley is centralized. It is not by site. We have no HR here on site. Our exhibition curating and fabrication is all by site. We do everything here with no help from any other entity. And development is customized. So we do have a development staff here that raises money, but there is development support for the institution from the university. So these are, you have to, when you see these, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7 divisions, you have to know which one yours is. I think most places are going to just do everything by site. If you are university or strictly like under the auspices of like a city or a state government, then it would be different. Next, please. So here it is, the operational data. This is the killer. The main points are: 1, the financials, including your summary and revenue, points about facilities, staffing, human resources, attendance, collections, and parent organization, if applicable. So financial summary, this is really your operating expenses and revenues. This is why as well as your non-operational expenses and revenues. So things like your bookstore and any kind of fundraising. You also need to know your endowment for the value for the past 5 years. So this is where your accounting people and your finance people are going to be essential to helping, unless you really are like a super tiny and one person has all this information. It's really, really helpful to have somebody with access to that information. They will also ask about your financial revenue, focusing on typical government grants, if those exist anymore, your private fundraising, and your operational revenue, things like ticket sales and sales in a restaurant or shop. They will also ask, detailed questions about expenses, between how it's allocated between your operations, your management, and your fundraising initiatives, as well as how budgets are spent between exhibitions, collections, educational programs, your administration, staffing, visitor services, and your physical plant, which of course is always some expense there. So again, these are very detailed questions that you will have to give percentages to of your total operating budget. And then there are the questions about facilities, which is your total square footage, how it's allocated to your exhibition program, your collections, offices, and if you are the steward of any historic buildings. So next, please, Joanne. Then there's staffing, not a hard one. Usually it's just the amount of full-time, part-time, or volunteer staff. How it's allocated per function. So if you have exhibitions, collections, education, your visitor services, development, and building operations, how each of your employees is focused on one of those functions. They will ask about attendance. So that's your operating hours on a daily basis, and they will want a yearly cumulative amount of hours you're open. They also want to have 5 years of your attendance. And you also is your percentage of paid admission versus unpaid. As you know, some students or there's people who have ICOM, the International Committee on Museums. It's like a program you can join to get in museums for free. AAM has a card if you join that. So those are people who don't pay to go to museums, but they will want to know that percentage. They will want a description of your holdings. There's about 35 categories to choose from, including the standard painting and sculpture, but also to include the types of institutions that are anthropological, history, herbariums, zoos, and even library collections. And that's, again, there's just boxes to click. Most places have more than one kind of collection, but they pretty much have everything there. And then the parent organization, which again, in my previous 2 jobs, I did not have a parent organization. This time I do. So the University of California, Berkeley is our parent organization for this institution, and that would also apply to anyone who worked for Smithsonian or a strictly governmental or city. I think a place like LACMA would be the county of Los Angeles is strictly governmental over LACMA in some form or another. So that would be an example of that. And there's more. Next. Okay, yeah, no, actually that was all the operational part. So that took a couple of slides. So the changes since the last review is divided into 2 parts, and these are significant changes over the past 5 years. Things like if you've changed a director, you've had a merger, the death of a founder, or a significant restructuring. If there's been a disaster, fire, earthquake, flood. This is sad, but this actually does affect some institutions. How are the collections changed? Have there been significant acquisitions or deaccessions or a change of focus? Or, in the case of like the poor gardener in Boston, a theft. Finances. Has there been a capital campaign? Has there been significant financial donations and or losses, including loss of funders? Those are things to mark the past 5 years. And then the future challenges, is there a new director coming in or a new building, restructuring of staff, a capital campaign? There is a free form space to describe as needed since these things are kind of difficult to quantify and drop downs. So there is a chance to write out what your future challenges may be if there are any. Okay, thank you. Next. And then this is part of the changes from the last review section, but there's a little part about compliance and wrap up. So the compliance are they ask you these straight out questions. What are the needs, wants, and challenges of the people your museum serves or wants to serve? What is the museum doing to address them? List 1 or more specific measurable impacts, outcomes your museum's educational activities have had on its audiences or communities. What was the indicator of this impact? And 3, share a story about an instance where your museum feels it took a risk, made a change, or did something innovative that compelled it to the next level of fulfilling its educational public service and or collection stewardship role. So this is going to require, some administrative, collaborative, curatorial, everybody contributing to these questions. They're pretty deep, they're multi-part. But they are important. And then the wrap up is a general question that an accredited museum is more than the sum of its parts. Tell us why your museum matters and what gives you the greatest pride. Describe for the commission why your museum is important and to whom it is important and how it makes a difference. So again, there's creativity there, really goes back to your mission statement, but there's a lot of free form for anecdotal examples and really, the director, I think, drives a lot of this because they're the head of the organization. But it has definitely contributed. So you can go next. And then there's the attachments. So these are also like killer on the time consuming. So the mission statement, that essentially starts the museum's public service role. If you don't have a mission statement, you're gonna have to get one, and they can help you with it. Usually, I've never had a problem with the mission statement. They're sort of a bit of a boilerplate, but you do have to customize them for your particular institution. But there's a lot of the same verbiage in all of them. Institutional Code of Ethics. So yes, states that the general ethical principles apply to the governing authority, staff, and volunteers, and addresses issues specific to each group. Yeah, so Code of Ethics, can be a very time-consuming thing to work out. It has to be compliant with a lot of standards dictated by AAM. So there are guides to that. My favorite, unfavorite is the strategic institutional plan. I've done 3 strategic plans before. I hate them all. I mean, I understand that they bring sort of a coalescence and focus to things. They're enormously labor intensive and require an enormous amount of financial backing, which often they tend to be theoretical and a wish list of things that don't really come together. This is my 3rd one. So, I can explain what a strategic plan is, but it is now required for AAM accreditation, which is unfortunate. Disaster preparedness emergency response is pretty standard. That's just the response and plans for all the relevant emergencies and threats, natural, mechanical, biological, human. There are pretty much samples around that. You can pretty much crib from most places if you don't have one. And I'm happy to help show you anything we have. I've been doing this long enough to where I kind of coalesce them from a bunch of different sources over the years. And Joanne's favorite, the collections management policy, which should policies be consistent with the established standards and practices issued by relevant discipline-specific organizations. So like the History Museum has its own standard, that STEP thing. Art museums are a little bit less specific, but there are, I think, just sort of this assumed covenant of good faith about certain physical properties that you maintain your art with, and humidity and temperature control and storage and handling and insurance and things like that. So collection management policies generally are existing. If you're new to this, they may require updating. Next. So then there's the on-site visit. So once you do all of that, then you submit it. And then, as Joanne says, there's an on-site visit. That will require interviews with staff. Usually we did it the last time. We had the director, the content curatorial exhibition staff, and administration building facilities. So they really want to sit down and ask questions, and they won't tell you what they are, but they will ask you these questions, and you just have to do your best to answer them. And then, as I said, I missed it here at the top, it's 2 visitors from other museums. So it's usually directors, but it doesn't have to be. It could be high-ranking officials from other institutions. And then there's the tour, where you walk them around the galleries and the public spaces, your storage and mechanical systems. And then the little thing that I learned years ago is that they will ask you a database inventory test question. So they'll ask you to call up a particular work of art or a particular rare material object in the collection and go and find it for them. So once that usually takes parts of 2 days, unless it's a very large organization, but I've only done parts of 2 days where there's maybe the tours, because if there's different facilities, different locations, they might require that. So usually I would say 2 days is generally, unless you're like a very large organization that needs to visit like wings of the institution, like the Met or the National Gallery. And then next, for my last slide, you wait. Now, I'm not talking about denial right now because I've never dealt with that and I don't know. I think you'd have to be pretty bad off to have a complete denial. What usually happens is you're accepted, you're home free, or you're tabled with a follow-up memo on what needs to be done and addressed and by when. So that's what we have had happen with us, which was my first time. I was utterly shocked. I would say almost outraged because I honestly felt that they were just saying something because they needed to say something, because the 3 topics were things that were in process for being addressed. And they knew that clearly. And So as far as I'm concerned, what we ended up doing on the tabling of those issues was just write out we wrote it out what we were doing instead of just explaining it in person. That there were, I mean, to be as general as I could, we had some works on a long-term deposit which had provenance issues, which we knew. They had been there for years. The donor was not giving them to the institution and they needed to be returned, which we were in process of doing. Fine. So we wrote all of that out and then we did it. So that was one example of, there was a large collection that was in the process of being processed and accessioned by preparators and registrars. It's over 3,000 objects. It was in process. They knew that. It was considered an object to be tabled, but once we addressed, it's still not done. It won't be done for 2 or 3 years, but we wrote that out. And then I would say maybe about 2 to 3 months later, we finally were graciously given a reaccreditation. So that's the story, very firsthand. That happened just earlier this year. And with that, I will turn it over to someone in process of hopefully doing this, which is my colleague, Anna Toledano.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, Joanne. I'm sorry, everyone, that I tried to get fancy with our everyone has free Canva at a nonprofit. Look at the price I paid for not keeping it simple, stupid. So, I'm sorry about that. But the content's still there. So my name's Anna Toledano. I'm the executive director of the Los Altos History Museum in Los Altos, which is a teeny tiny little museum. We have right now 6 full-time staff members and 1 part-time. So we're a pretty small operation where each person is kind of a department of 1 or 1.5, or with me, it's like 12. So, thinking about time for this process, when I started here, I was interested in thinking about, maybe we could be accredited. That's something that could be cool. And so next slide. I went to the American Alliance of Museums conference in Los Angeles last month. And there was a roundtable they have this fancy CEO and director's secret track that I had gotten invited to, which I was like a little bit like, oh my gosh, how did they let me in here? But it was very helpful because they had actual members of the AAM Accreditation Commission there to talk to us about the process. And they had one session that was for small museums and one that was for medium to large museums. And I felt pretty happy that they divided us, because I was just concerned. My first museum job was at a museum where there were over 500 employees. So I've worked at huge, and I've now worked at maybe not the tiniest, but pretty small. And I knew that from the resources we had at my previous institution, when we had just gotten 1 gallery accredited with some of my help, writing some things up in the early days of my museum career, where I didn't really know what any of the stuff that John mentioned, all that the high level stuff and meeting with the people. I was kind of kept at an arm's length. So I was kind of intimidated. I thought, there's no way we're gonna have enough staff power to do this. How is this gonna happen? So luckily, the message they were trying to send at this meeting was that AM is trying to make accreditation more accessible. Basically, I don't know if that's true, but that's what they said. So we have to see in practice if that's the case. And whether, if it does become more accessible, because really it's only, I think 5% of museums in the country have accreditation according to their statistics. So I'm going to talk about what the pros and cons are, what the benefits are. Are the benefits a badge of excellence, or is it exclusionary? From my perspective of trying to go through, should we do this or should we not do this? Is this worth it to spend my staff time on this effort? Next slide. Which got a little cut off, but what to do now that map is doged is this. So one of the first steps I took was to apply for a map assessment, as Joanne mentioned, the museum assessment program. And I was really excited about that because It's in part since it's with IMLS and AAM together, it would have been fully funded, which is great for us because we are a super, super, super modest museum. And I came in at a deficit and was trying to save money everywhere that I possibly could. And so there was no way that I could spend money, like even a couple $1,000s for us is a really, really big pain point. So these are things that a small museum might worry about, where like a big museum, it's like, oh, chump change, because of the scale of things. So I got a note from MAP about a few months ago saying, we don't really know what the status of this is, but we're gonna let you know. And then a couple months later, I got, sorry, we're canceling it for this session because we just don't have any information on whether IMLS will be able to even administer these grants. So they said, we hope that you'll apply back next year, and they are sending us some items. They're sending us some free self-assessment items and things like that that you would have originally had to pay for. But hearing that the funding from IMLS was axed was pretty disappointing. And so when I went to the AAM conference, I mentioned this to them, and they were saying that was the reason. The accreditation commission members were saying that's the reason why they're trying to make things more accessible now, because the map is not within reach really anymore for institutions that can't afford to self-fund. But that whole process wasn't for naught, I would say. Just filling out the map application for me gave me some guidance on areas where we might be able to improve, because they asked for particular how many core documents do you have ready? How many areas are your budgets kind of ship shape in? And that evaluative process was useful in some respects. Next slide. So the self-assessment was what the commissioners encouraged we engage in as the dive straight into the accreditation self-assessment instead of doing a map first. Just bypass the map, because in the past you really used to have to have done a map before you did accreditation. That was it was like an unwritten rule from what I gather. But now that is one of the hurdles that they see the AAM is trying to remove in this current climate because of the federal government and all these kinds of funding opportunities. We don't want a lot of museums to be turned away from accreditation because of that, which I appreciated. And some of the tips that they gave us were, don't gloss over, hawk your achievements, don't gloss over any issues, kind of similar things that John was mentioning. Set practical goals to fix any issues you might have. And I thought, this might be a really good strategic planning substitute, which, yeah, I have all these same thoughts about strategic plans, but I do have to come up with one for my board. That's a timely project for me. And I thought, wow, having this framework of this self-assessment might be a really good way to do that, even though I know you need the strategic, it's like chicken and egg, like you need the strategic plan to be able to do the accreditation. But even without having accreditation be this end goal, just going through this exercise, I think would be useful for my institution. And the once a month team meetings, we could make that kind of environment for ourselves, even if we don't do it officially with AAM. And they also mentioned that you could get an AAM employee as a touch point if you'd like, if you're going through the process, and they can kind of be your personal, your assigned guide and help you with questions and things like that, which I confirmed by talking to AAM employees. Yeah, it's like, it depends on which one you get, I guess, right? As John's shaking his head. But at least this was the effort that they were trying to make, and I appreciated that. Next slide.
Don't expect any quick answers. I'll say that much.
Yeah.
Like email, first of all, you can't get them on the phone ever,
Ooh.
ever. And you leave a message, maybe an email, and then days will pass. You're not going to get same day answers. I'm too East Coast to know about that. I wanted someone to answer something in 5 minutes. No.
That's for I find, yeah, email's not the best for me, but if you call me on that phone, you will definitely get me. So interesting. Good to know.
Me too, but we're dinosaurs. People don't use phones anymore. So sad. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm too much of a historian here. So yes, it is truly a non-zero cost. Is it? What is the cost? So yes, Joanne mentioning staff time. My God, I think about it, how much time I would have to spend doing this thing. Holy guacamole, I'm already here all the time. Oh, but then they suggest one of the kind of more tone deaf suggestions I received at this roundtable was you could bring in an independent professional to do what MAP did. I was like, yeah, where with my money bags? If I had a donor, maybe that would be nice, but otherwise it's going to be inside the house. And that they were saying at the meeting that they are having difficulty finding peer reviewers. They were asking us to volunteer to be peer reviewers, not just on grants, which I guess now we're kind of in a this iced holding pattern, but we're encouraging us to sign up to be peer reviewers for accreditation and MAP assessments, and if that continues. And I was thinking, I wonder if this is all of speaking back to this crisis of museum work and how we just don't have enough time to do any of these things, and accreditation suffers because we don't have enough time to sign up for peer review, and then it's this whole vicious cycle. Trying to think about what would make this process easier for us. So yes, depending on your museum's AAM membership level, you do have to pay. I mean, the large portion of that is to cover costs. They're not trying to fleece anyone out of this. From what I'm trying to look at this, charitably, because it is a good way to keep, status, certain standards in the profession. But it is a private organization certification, and what are we paying for with that? What do we get out of that? So next slide. So what are we going to do at Los Altos? What's next for us? With, like I said, with fewer than 5% of museums in the US accredited, according to AAM right now, what is the point? This makes me wonder, why are so few museums accredited? Is it too hard? Are people intimidated? Because that's where I was kind of coming from this impression that it's like we're never going to eat, like we'll be denied in 5 seconds. Why even bother going through this whole rigmarole? And learning that that's not the impression that AAM wants to give off about this process. So since that was such a recent development, I'm hoping that they make that messaging more public and more evident by having examples of museums that maybe they've helpfully fast tracked during this very extraordinary time, and maybe just made it easier to fast track. Because what is accreditation giving us anyway? If it's there to give us this framework for strategic planning, then I think maybe the door could be opened a little bit more. If it's to have an upper echelon gold star, then you can keep it the way it is. It's really, what is its purpose? And I'm still trying to figure that out. I know it's different for each museum, and I'm still trying to figure out what the purpose would be for my museum. So my plans going forward are really to possibly do it on our own timeline without being registered, because then we won't have pressure of fees that we've paid running out of time, or the risk of getting tabled, which are risks that, frankly, it's such a small institution, we can't really take. It could really make or break the bottom line of our organization. To like lose any staff members would be, it's mission critical. And my plan going forward is to see where the holes are in our core documents and follow that self-assessment, and possibly even dive deeper and ask the board to engage in the governance self-assessment. So choosing which self-assessments might be useful for us, and then see, once we get maybe in some point of time a critical mass of progress on our collection, all of these sorts of governance, better documentation, all of these sorts of strategic priorities that I have, then maybe we can look into that. But I do appreciate that they have made the self-assessment freely available, so that if you want to walk through it before committing, you can still do that process. So now next slide. So that's the key takeaways. AAM's trying to make AAM accreditation more accessible. Whether that's happening, well, I'm delighted to be seeing who will be coming through with accreditation soon. It takes a lot of work, but at a small institution, it could substitute for strategic planning, even though that's also kind of takes a lot of work too. But at least this is one fraction of it. We can do a mini version. And for many small organizations, the whole process might not be worth the effort at whatever stage they're at, but individual elements could be very useful. So thank you. Oh, you're muted.
What, you can't lip read? We have just a few minutes if anyone has questions for either John or Anna about their processes. And I thought I saw something in the chat, so let me take a look at that. Oh, okay, got it. Does anyone have any questions, or have we pretty much explained it all?
Another fun idea I had was like accreditation support groups among museums that are kind of at the same point or going through it, and then you could meet about issues you're having or things like that if you don't get an AAM person on your. So that's a Bay Area support group.
And just compare, like, well, what are they telling you? What are they telling you? What do you need
Mhm.
to improve on? Well, how's your policy, collections management policy? You know, that's not a bad idea.
Definitely.
Um,
Mhm.
yeah, full disclosure, the Computer History Museum is not accredited. And if that is ever something that we do choose to undertake, I think it will really take the whole village to sort of get everything that's required. So again, there's a lot to consider about it, but it must be a really, really good feeling when you've completed all the steps and you know that you've gotten it.
I'm going to volunteer to be a site visit person. I already did it. They
That's
haven't
great.
contacted me, but I just felt like karmically, I wanted to correct what I felt was like a little bit of like unfairness on our visitors' part. So we'll see.
I think that's great. And you also have direct experience and
Well,
a
I know I've
lot
done it three
more than
times.
most people
I've done
have.
it 3 times. Oh, I've been subjected to it 3 times. So
So you would certainly know better than someone like me. Oh, we have a question. Um, does accreditation have any known impacts on donors?
Mm.
Is it a marketable attribute? Anyone want to
I would
speak to
say
that?
in general it is. I mean, it's certainly something you can, I want to say the word brag about or give yourself a pat on the back that you are an AM accredited organization. Donors, I don't think I've ever actually had a donor ask if I was AM accredited in order to give something as a financial or art donation. I think a lot of it used to be attached to loans and other kinds of collaborations between institutions if you wanted to share in an exhibition tour or exchange loans in between institutions that they would ask if you are accredited. That again, I've never been asked that before. I don't believe, and then there's facility reports that registrars deal with, which pretty much tell you everything about the building and its ability to protect a work of art. So that is something of a substitution, I guess, in a way for assuring anybody about the soundness of the staff or the building or things like that. So, but it is something that you can talk about and say is a positive attribute that you've gone through it and yeah.
Good question. Well, if there isn't anything else, I will end the meeting for everyone. As I said, feel free to email our board and we'd be happy to conduct any follow-up. You will be getting an email with a kind of a evaluation of the program, and don't be shy. We can take it. And thank you very much for spending your lunch hour with us, and check out Cultural Connections for more exciting programs and events moving forward into the future.
Thank
Thank
you for
you all
coming,
very
everyone.
much.
Thank you.